Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today, ladies and gentlemen, in the studio, our favourite doctor, Dr. Sarah Myhill, comes back to have a little update with us and obviously to check me over, make sure that I'm still
Alive.
functioning as a normal human person. How are you?
Absolutely fine, Richard. Thank you so much. It's very nice to be back too, because you ask all the right questions.
Well, I hope I'm going to ask all the right questions
I'm sure you will.
on this occasion. Now, in the post came to me very kindly a new book that you have written, and I haven't had the time to actually read it all the way through, but I did open up on a particularly interesting chapter, which maybe we can talk about shortly, which is all to do with the breath. And I think a lot of people have spoken to me actually about coming on and doing breath work and talking about how important breathing is. And you would think that, of course, breathing is important, but the way that you breathe is very important. So tell us about this. But hang on, before we do that, how are you? What have you been doing? And give us a little update into your world.
Oh well, I've never not been on a steep learning curve.
Right.
So I'm now into my fifth decade of working with naturopathic medicine and the like. And from the very beginning, my interest has been in fatigues, and this is now the third edition of the book. So the first edition was prompted by research that we'd done into mitochondria in chronic fatigue syndrome. The second edition, I threw in everything that I knew at the time, but this is the third edition. Is a much honed down version, because I've been down many rabbit holes and many blind alleys, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And this book is now the bare minimum you need to do to treat people who have chronic fatigue syndrome or ME or long COVID. And the good news about it is it's also the starting point to prevent the diseases of old age. So if you put in place all these regimes that we're going to talk about, including the breathing, of course,
Yes.
then you massively reduce your chances of developing a dementia, a cancer, or a heart disease. So it's the whole of medicine packed into with special reference to fatigue syndromes.
And who is it aimed at?
It's aimed at the general public.
Right.
I mean, I know I've been working general practice for over 40 years now, and the point about doctors is they are the interface between the science and the art of speaking to people. And there's lots of science out there that tells us how to treat things or what's biologically plausible, but we have to make that make sense for the man in the street. So I'm always talking to the man on the Clapham omnibus, as they say. So I like to use the language of human beings that
Yes.
makes sense. So my analogies are, common garden analogies that we can all understand. Because without understanding the why of what you're doing something, then people are never going to do it. Because I'm asking people to do difficult things,
Yes.
but if they understand why they're doing difficult things, then they will do them.
Well, and that is very much an approach that has been missing, I think, from the medical profession in recent times. And as people are now sort of trying to think, do I trust my GP? And there's lots of options. And on this channel, we've been talking about various other health regimes and ideas and suggestions, and many of them really old. Mm-hmm. It's sort of taking a step back from big pharma, isn't it?
Correct. And the awful thing is that doctors are now educated by big pharma. And big pharma's mantra, remember, is, a patient cured is a customer lost. And the only responsibilities they have is to their shareholders.
Yes.
So don't think big pharma is there to help you, get well. In the short term, their drugs will control symptoms, but it's long-term pain. So naturopathic medicine is all about getting at the root cause of asking the question why, and what are the mechanisms, and why am I having this symptom? And that, of course, has obvious implications for management, because if you know the why, then you can put in place the how.
Now, on your book here, the thing that first leapt out at me, and it might to other people, is the "and long COVID" bit. Now, I've heard, running a YouTube channel in the area that we talk about, there are so many bits of information, misinformation, confused information, and some people say, oh, that long COVID doesn't exist. Some people say the COVID didn't exist. And in the end, you kind of just nod and smile and go, okay, fair enough. So what is what is your take on all of this?
Okay, well, I deal with real people and they have real symptoms that stop them getting on with their lives. And the important thing to remember is that chronic fatigue syndrome, ME and long COVID are not diagnoses, they are clinical pictures. And that's what you see as a doctor in everyday practice. You see somebody comes in with a clinical picture. And of course, all three are characterised by fatigue. And we then have to ask the question, what are the mechanisms of fatigue? You know, why is that person fatigued when somebody else is not?
Yeah.
And you have to get back to looking at mechanisms. And once you can identify the mechanisms of that fatigue, then that has obvious implications for management. So chronic fatigue syndrome is the clinical picture we see of poor energy delivery mechanisms. ME and long COVID are chronic fatigue syndrome plus inflammation. And inflammation occurs when the immune system is busy. And if the immune system is busy, that's very uncomfortable because that gives us the symptoms of pain, redness, swelling, loss of function, heat, which are the characteristics of inflammation. And then the immune system, like our brain, is enormously demanding of energy. So if the immune system is activated for reasons of chronic infection, say, then that's going to kick a hole in the energy bucket. So we're going to end up with less energy. And anybody who's had flu and has been bedbound for a couple of days knows what that feels like. And that's what my ME and long COVID patients feel like all the time. They feel like they've got low-grade flu because there's this low-grade inflammation that's kicking a hole in the energy bucket, and maybe energy delivery mechanisms are compromised as well, hence the clinical picture.
One of the things that I've been learning recently is about the fight or flight thing, in which, as I understand it, and I try and get this over as eloquently as one can, that if go back to the caveman days,
Yep.
They were saber-toothed tiger. It comes out, and for a short period, your immune system shuts down because it's the flight mode that's important, and
Correct.
you run and you climb a tree and you get away, and that only lasts a few minutes or a minimum of an hour or something like that. Then you get back into calm mode.
Correct.
And your immune system kicks back in. But if you are in that situation of fear continually, or stress, as we are in this modern world,
Correct.
then your immune system isn't working to the degree that it should be. Is that
correct?
I seem to have managed. You're nodding and saying
No,
it's correct. So
absolutely spot on. And that's why long COVID and ME and chronic fatigue are so common.
Right.
When I was in
Yes.
working general practice in the 1980s, it was said then that 30% of consultations then were the tired all the time, the TATT concentrations. Why have I not got more energy? Of course, patients don't go to doctors these days with that complaint because they know they're pretty poor at treating it. They're not asking the right questions, so they go to alternative practitioners to address that. But yes, the tired all the time clinical picture is very common. And guess what? We all want more energy.
Yes.
And these interventions we're going to talk about, the athletes put in place because they find they can increase their athletic performance by dint of putting in place these interventions. So we all live on an energy spectrum.
Yeah.
I know I'm not at the top of it. I'm not an elite athlete, but I do want to live my life to its full potential. And to do that, you need energy.
Yes, of course.
So all these things that I'm recommending in the book, well, not all of them, but the majority of them I do, and you will do, and Julia, you will do too, because that will put you, you will be at your most productive, you will lead the best possible life, and as I say, not die from dementia, heart disease and cancer.
And just for the audience, Julia is just come around here, Julia, and just show your face, because Julia's monitoring what we're doing. Here she is. She's actually here. So let's go through some of those things and tell people the sort of thing that you've got in the the book.
Well, the analogy that I like to use is the car analogy, because guess what? I get it, and so do my patients get it. And for your car to go, you've got to have the right fuel in the tank. Yep. And that's all about diet and gut function. And we could spend a whole hour talking about that if you wished, because that's the single most important thing you have to do. So you have to have the right fuel in the tank. Then you need oxygen, because obviously you've got to burn that fuel in the presence of oxygen to generate energy. And then we need the mitochondrial engine of that car. And that's where my first and early area of interest were. Published 3 papers on that subject, demonstrating that in fatigue syndromes, mitochondria are running slow. Then you need the thyroid accelerator pedal, and the adrenal gearbox, i.e. the control mechanisms.
You've really thought about this, haven't you, with the analogy of the car. It's brilliant.
Well, it's everybody gets it.
Yeah.
And I say, I'm going to be asking people to do difficult things. The diet and the supplements, they're difficult things to do. Some of them involve expense. But if you really get it, if you have the intellectual imperative to do it, then you will see it through, because life is awfully precious, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't a dress rehearsal for the real thing. This is it.
Absolutely. So the first one that you were talking about seemed, and you were talking about diet.
Yes.
And you've written some books about the ketone diet.
Correct.
And eating more meat rather than vegetables, and that we get. So could you just cover just very briefly the importance of meat over other things?
Well, one of the advantages of meat is a very rich source of mitochondria, because the muscle of an animal is using a lot of energy and it's full of mitochondria. And so if you want some raw materials to feed your mitochondria, then you eat somebody else's mitochondria. Right. So meat is going to be inherently rich in the micronutrients we need for our mitochondria, like coenzyme Q10, magnesium, acetyl L-carnitine, vitamin B3, and so on. But it's not a high meat diet. Yes, we need some meat in it. And in fact, that brings up another really important clinical point, which is that the vegetarians and the vegans are at a greater risk of fatigue syndromes than omnivores.
Are they?
There's about a third to a half of the patients I see are vegetarian or vegan. And I don't persuade, but I encourage them to get back to eating eggs and fish and meat, because they are such nourishing and important foods.
So when people, sorry to interrupt, but when people say, and they say to me, oh, but if you eat meat, it's a sort of one step away from the original, because people were eating grasses and vegetables and all of that, and they say, you could eat it and you wouldn't have to eat the animal.
Well, we are omnivores. We've evolved over hundreds of thousands of years as omnivores, and we have a gut that is an omnivorous gut.
Right.
So the upper gut is a carnivorous gut. It's like my dog's gut. It's a sterile, acidic gut for the business of digesting meat and fat and proteins. And that's about the first 22 foot of gut. Now, the last sort of 5 foot of gut, the colon, that's where the microbiome is. That's a vegetarian gut. And that's there for the business of digesting fibre, which is a very important part of our diet, of course. And by dint of digesting fibre, we produce some vitamins, we generate some neurotransmitters, we program the immune system, but we ferment fibre there. And fibre is fermented to produce ketones, which are the perfect fuel for mitochondria. So the other source of ketones, of course, comes from fat. So we should be eating a diet that is rich in fat, rich in fibre, that's lots of vegetables, of course, and low in sugars and carbohydrates and processed foods. Now, the mitochondria can run on sugar. It's rocket fuel. And if I had an elite athlete who was a sprinter, for example, then, for that short window of time, you want them running on sugar. But for the long haul, for the marathon runners, for us that have got a long haul, we've got some decades ahead of us, yes, we should be running on ketones.
Right.
And ketones are the least damaging to mitochondria. Sugar passes through mitochondria, but in doing so, they produce a lot of free radicals, which damage them. So great for the short term, but not for the long haul. Ketones are ideal. And just as an example of how important they are for the brain, although it weighs just 2% of body weight, it consumes 20% of all the energy the body generates, which is huge.
Amazing,
it is huge.
That is an amazing thing.
And the commonest cause of death in women in this country today is now dementia. But you can reverse dementia with a ketogenic diet. Not my words, but the words of Dale Bredesen, neurologist, California. And he puts his dementing patients on low-carbohydrate ketogenic diets and improves their brain function and reverses their dementia. In fact, lovely work done by Patrick Holden. And he's got a wonderful website called Food for the Brain, where he states that dementia is 99% preventable. And there are 3 important factors here. One is the low-carbohydrate ketogenic diet. 2 is B vitamins to correct your homocysteine, and 3, fish oils. Do those 3 things and you can highly protect yourself from dementia.
Where do you get vitamin B from?
Well, you can get them. I mean, eating meat, of course, a very good, rich source of B vitamins, but because of modern agriculture, because we are not recycling minerals from humans back onto the land, you could be eating what you would think was the most perfect diet, but still be deficient.
Right.
So I think we should all be taking a basic package of supplements, good multivitamin, good multimineral, which of course is my sunshine salt, and then some vitamin D, 10,000 IU, vitamin C, maybe 5 grams daily, and then fish oils. And do those things, and again, highly protective against disease.
Now, when the book came and I opened it up, there was a fascinating chapter on oxygen.
Yeah.
And, everybody goes, yeah, well, we all need oxygen, don't they? Isn't that the thing they put people on the ventilators when COVID came in? And unfortunately, it seemed to sort of knock them all out.
I'll explain why.
And yes, I thought you might. And I have looked at Wim Hof, who has his somewhat extreme breathing techniques, but then he is an incredible man who can go into ice for hours on end and feel no pain.
Amazing.
Which just goes to show, and so many of the old gurus that you read about, the Indian fakirs or fakirs, however it's pronounced, would do these amazing stunts, and a lot of breathing would come from that. My dad used to follow all of that as a younger man, and he would tell me about it. So breathing was something that immediately came to be an interesting thing for me. And I read a book by John Nestor, I think it was.
Correct, yeah.
Called Breath, which I would also recommend because it talks about the skull and the teeth and what we've done by breathing through our mouth. Anyway, I'll let you explain because that immediately resonated with me.
Well, we all know that, we need oxygen to survive. We need oxygen to burn the fuel. And the question is, how does oxygen get to mitochondria? Now, we inhale air, of course, which contains oxygen. And then in the lungs, oxygen jumps onto the red cells, the hemoglobin, where it then circulates around the body until it gets near a mitochondria, which might be in your brain or your heart. And then oxygen jumps off the hemoglobin and to the mitochondria where it's needed. But the big question is, how does oxygen know to jump onto hemoglobin in the lungs and off hemoglobin where it's needed in the mitochondria? Because if it was the other way around, it would be a complete disaster, wouldn't it? And the answer is carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is partly responsible for the acidity of the blood. Now, where mitochondria are working hard and burning oxygen, they're producing carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide dissolves in the bloodstream to form a weak carbonic acid, i.e. the blood is slightly acidic where mitochondria are working hard. And that means oxygen hops off. The reverse is true in the lungs, because in the lungs we are exhaling air. We're washing carbon dioxide away. We're washing it out of the bloodstream, so that carbonic acid the blood becomes slightly alkali. And in an alkali situation, oxygen jumps onto hemoglobin. So what controls oxygen delivery to mitochondria is carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is obviously a waste gas, and you think we want to get rid of it. But actually, we've got to have the right amount in our bloodstream for the reasons we've just discussed. Many people, when stressed for whatever reason, through adrenaline or whatever, they overbreathe, they hyperventilate.
Yes.
And if they breathe too much, they wash the carbon dioxide out of the blood. The blood becomes too alkali, and so oxygen cannot jump off hemoglobin with its normal facility. And this is interesting because when you do pulse oximetry by measuring oxygen in the bloodstream, it measures oxygen that's stuck onto hemoglobin, but it doesn't measure oxygen that's actually getting to mitochondria. So it may look as if you've got 100% oxygen there, so all is well, but actually it can be a less than perfect situation. So to address the question, hyperventilation, how do we retain more carbon dioxide so oxygen delivery is improved? And the first thing you do is shut your mouth, breathe through your nose.
Yes.
Why? Because that increases what's called the dead space, i.e. the more air that we re-inhale contains carbon dioxide. So instead of most of the carbon dioxide stays in our lungs and airways and then goes back down into the lungs. So that's a starter. The second thing that's important is to slow down the rate at which you breathe. And of course, we know many meditation techniques, yoga techniques, use this technique to slow down the rate at which we breathe. And the third important thing is to learn to breathe with your diaphragm. Now, that has other major knock-on benefits as well. Because one of the questions that's always eluded me is, how does blood get from the venous system, from the veins back to the heart? Because there's no pressure difference. In fact, the pressure would be higher in the veins.
Gravity's pulling it down.
Exactly. You're fighting gravity all the time. Now, the answer is it has to do with the diaphragm. Because the diaphragm doesn't just pull air into the thoracic cavity, it also pulls venous blood into the thoracic cavity when you breathe in. And it does that, the diaphragm descends, it compresses the abdomen, so it squeezes blood from the abdomen, positive pressure, into the lung, into the chest, negative pressure, and thereby the venous return. And that is why those ventilators for COVID patients were so disastrous, because they all relied on positive pressure ventilation. So the pressure is always positive in the chest, blowing in, coming out, blowing in, and that hugely impaired the venous return to the heart.
Right.
And that was just such a disastrous input for people who had severe COVID.
And should they have known that before they?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, at the time, when COVID first came, it was a relatively unknown disease. There were threats that we were going to have, 1,000 people descending on hospitals, and everything had to be done. But always rely on the doctors on the front line, because they see what's happening. And they saw with their eyes and their clinical experience that putting people on ventilators was not good for them.
Yes.
And did not improve their longevity. And so they rapidly got discounted and stopped being used.
Do you think, and by the way, I've realised that for the first half of what we've been talking, my microphone wasn't on, so you may have had the joy of not actually hearing my voice, which is probably a pleasure to a lot of people, but you did hear Dr. Sarah Myhill. Do you think that the way that we live our lives now, a sedentary life, has caused people to shallow breathe more than... Because it seems that people do just breathe here, they don't use their diaphragm as much, and it just struck me then listening to you that might be, we spend so much time sitting, so it's so much easier just to draw in a little bit and very frequently.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure of the answer of that. But yes, we breathe less when we're sitting still for obvious reasons. No, I think the real problem is the adrenaline of modern life, which is stressful, and that fires the respiratory centre, so we breathe faster.
Right.
Now that, of course, is totally desirable. If Primitive's woman is trotting down the jungle, then she wants to have lots of oxygen on board, and so that in the event of having to run for her life, obviously carbon dioxide would build up extremely quickly, because mitochondria can switch on in milliseconds, and then she would have the best oxygen delivery to deal with that. But if we have stress so that we're overbreathing, but we're not burning it off, we're not, running through the jungle line, then we're going to have impaired oxygen delivery, and we're going to be hyperventilating.
So it's a very short chapter in the book. It's a very important chapter, as I was flicking through. But it dawned on me, having read this other stuff, it's one of those things, you can change your diet and you can get on with it. Breathing is something that you do subconsciously most of the time. And so it's about building a habit, presumably.
Correct. And it's about doing the breathing exercises, which are through the nose, slowing it down, using your diaphragm. And, you do it every time you're sitting down. First thing in the morning before you wake up, when you go to sleep in bed, if you're sitting in front of the telly, just do them, and then it becomes a habit.
Yes.
And you can change. I mean, even to the extent that some people will tape their mouths at night.
Yes.
In order
We've
to...
tried that. We did try. Didn't work for long.
Well,
Tape kept falling off.
Well, you don't take the whole thing. You just take the bit in the middle, because that feels safer that way.
Oh, right. The old hostage situation then with the gaffer tape.
No, don't recommend that.
I enjoyed doing that too. No, I didn't.
Don't recommend that.
Case.
But yes, breathe through your nose. And as you point out, that also changes the structure of the face.
That was that. I mean,
which
that
is
when
just
I
so
read
fascinating.
that was because we have crowded teeth, don't we? And
Correct.
400 years ago,
Correct.
we didn't.
Correct. I mean, wonderful book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston Price, who ascribed this to diet, yes, and to eating soft foods, but also, it's breathing is important. And, the body is an incredible dynamic thing, and it will just adjust itself to deal with the demands of the day. So if you're breathing through your mouth and you're not using your nose, then the nasal passages will shrink down and enlarge, so it's more difficult to breathe through your nose. But just the business of nose breathing helps to open them up so that they function more normally. And my guess is many conditions like snoring and postnasal drip can be ascribed to mouth breathing.
Well.
Sleep apnea, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I mean, of course, the other thing is, of course, the nose is designed to be breathed in that way because you've got protective...
Correct. It's full of little turbinates which create turbulence of the air. So any dust particles or viral particles or bacteria get stuck onto the sticky mucus where they can be dealt with and got rid of. It also warms the air as it comes in and cools the air. So it's a heat exchanger.
Yes.
So it's helping us to conserve energy. So yeah, we do have a nose for a jolly good reason.
Yes. I mean, it's a very blooming clever thing. So moving away from oxygen, because you've got lots of different things in here. And as I say, the book came over. I know. Just open up here on methylene blue for all chronic occasions, just by fluke. Now, we take methylene blue. We're advised by Clive de Carl, one of our, again, another friend of the show. And we haven't actually taken it fairly recently, actually, but we've been told that, and I've got a book about it, I forget by the chap now. It's an amazing thing, a dye that once was a malaria, or initially was used for malaria.
Yep.
But it has so many other good things.
Correct. Now, now methylene blue is helpful on both sides of the equation. It's helpful for energy delivery mechanisms, and it's also helpful for the inflammatory hole in the energy bucket, as I described it, for chronic infections. Because ME, chronic long COVID, often follows an infection, and instead of the body dealing with it and getting rid of it, it becomes chronic. So one of the things, if you've got one chronic infection and it's persisting in the body, it's there because the immune system hasn't been working efficiently. And if the immune system hasn't been working efficiently, there are often other chronic infections as well. So it's not as if we're treating with one chronic infection, just the fungal infection or the Epstein-Barr or the Lyme disease or the persistent COVID or whatever. It's a package of infections. So the approach these days is not to look for the antibiotic or the antifungal or the antiviral that we need, but try to reduce the total infectious load generally. And for many, that's all they need to do. And methylene blue is a very useful way to do that because it has multiple antimicrobial effects. As you point out, it good treatment for malaria, but we also know that many of the herpes viruses are sensitive to it. Chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, is derived from methylene blue, and we know that's right. A good treatment for COVID. So it has multiple actions, and in addition to that, it's a very important donator and receiver of electrons, and basically that's how we make energy. We make energy in mitochondria by moving electrons and protons around, very simplistically, and methylene blue facilitates that and makes it happen with less friction. So it's going to work on energy delivery mechanisms, that gets the thumbs up, and it's also going to help us reduce our total infectious load, and that gets the thumbs up too. So that's going to be a very useful player.
And is it something that you take every day as a supplement,
absolutely,
just for fun? Not just for fun, but you would, or would you take it specifically if you're feeling deplete of energy?
Well, I wouldn't start off with methylene blue. I'd start off with the PK diet and sorting out the up-fermenting and all that. But yes, it can be a very useful supplement. And the joy of methylene blue is it's fairly inexpensive. Now it is, when I say blue, it is really blue. I mean, it's inky blue.
Yes.
So what I recommend people do,
and your urine goes blue.
Absolutely, is mix it with some ascorbic acid. So,
right.
So the way I recommend people do it is you take 10 grams of methylene blue. Now, it has to be pharmaceutical grade methylene blue, and you know that 'cause it has BP 73 written on it. So you get your BP 73 methylene blue, and you put 10 grams in 1 litre of water, and that gives you 10 milligrams per mil.
Because you can buy, I mean, we get it in fluid form. So
that won't be a sufficient dose. That fluid form will be a 1% solution. It's also 10 milligrams per mil, but the dose will be up to 2 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So the dose will be up to 12 millilitres a day. And the one that comes in liquid, then you'll probably only get 30 mils in a bottle, so it won't last you very long.
Oh, I see.
So the key to methylene blue is you make up your litre bottle with your 10 grams, and that gives you your 10 milligrams per mil. And then you put your daily dose into a cup and add a couple of grams of ascorbic acid. Now, ascorbic acid converts methylene blue to leucomethylene blue, which is nearly colourless. Now, that means you can drink it without staining your teeth and your tongue and frightening the horses generally.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, right, I see. So that takes the colour out.
That takes the colour out.
We'll have to try that one.
So try that one, and then it goes back to methylene blue in the body because you're pea blue.
Yes.
So
you still pea blue, even though you've taken effectively what the visual colour out, but the
correct, because the way methylene blue works in the body is it oscillates between methylene blue and leucomethylene blue. So ascorbic acid just puts into the leucomethylene blue form to be consumed, and of course it gives you a nice dose of vitamin C at the same time.
Yes, and we all need that, and we're quite deficient in vitamin C.
Well, if what makes humans unique, or almost unique in the mammal world, is we cannot make our own vitamin C. So the reason my little dog doesn't get scurvy from eating a pure meat diet is she can synthesize her own vitamin C. And if we look at how much animals make, up to 5, 10, 15 grams a day, according to demand, they make a lot of it. So we can't do that. It's a 4 enzyme step. We lost one of those steps early on in evolution. So we have to consume our vitamin C. We have to get it from our food. And you might ask, well, where do carnivores get it from? And they get it because they used to, many carnivore diets in the past, they would eat the stomach contents of what it was that so not, probably not one for the modern chef, but so we get vitamin C from our diet essentially, but we could all do with extra.
Yes.
We are vitamin C deficient. In fact, you may have heard of Paul Marrick, who is the great vitamin C advocate for the treatment of acute COVID. And he says all COVID patients die with scurvy.
Do they?
Because vitamin C is effectively the bullets with which you shoot infection. And when they've used up all their vitamin C, there's nothing left, and they all die with zero undetectable vitamin C in their bloodstream. And of course, he was getting fantastic results. He first of all started using vitamin C in his ITU. His special area of interest was intensive care. And in ITU, you see the peritonitis, you see the septicemias, you see the really nasty infections. And with septicemia, the mortality is about 40%. Now, when he learned about vitamin C, he just added that into the regimes. So they had their oxygen, obviously, and their intravenous antibiotics and all else. But with the vitamin C added, the mortality reduced to below 1%.
Wow.
It is a fantastic tool and absolutely essential for anybody with any acute or chronic infection.
In the old days, before supplements where you could just buy ascorbic acid or variations of vitamin C, in this country, I mean, we would have apples and pears and berries and things like that. And I guess that's really the only source that you would have,
Correct.
is it?
Correct. Yeah, we got it from our diet. And you see, of course, what you have to remember is that nature is only interested in getting us to childbearing age. Once we've had our children, we're on the scrap heap.
I'm on the slag heap.
I'm on the slag heap too, together with you. But I want to live for as long as I can because I'm having fun.
Yes.
So as you get older, to stay well, you have to work harder at it, and if that means taking 5 grams of vitamin C a day, well, that's what I do, and it has many other benefits other than just helping us deal with infection.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you can live longer than childbearing age, you have a chance to acquire wisdom, which you have in spades, and can pass on to the likes of the audience.
Correct. And Richard Dawkins, of the selfish gene fame, has a word for that. He calls it memes. So I'm not capable of passing on my genes anymore, but I can pass on my memes, which are my useful nuggets of information to help us. And there's a meme there.
So let's have a look. What other things have you got in here that, maybe you will know better than I have. Sleep, it says, is a thing.
Absolutely.
And that's, again, we always hear this thing that sleep is so important, but it's one of those things that I think we all, Julia and I are just as guilty of this, that you'll have a late night and you've got to get up early in the morning and you just think, I'll make it up at some other time. I'll have a nap somewhere, but it doesn't quite work like that.
Well, to use the car analogy, sleep is the healing and repair. And all living creatures have to sleep. And you might ask, well, how do dolphins do that? Because they're swimming all the time. And dolphins, for example, they achieve it by they shut down one side of their brain, which sleeps. So they sleep with one half of their brain, and then they swap over, and the other half sleeps. So, even and birds on the wing do the same thing.
God. Imagine how useful that would be. Mind you, if you did, corporate companies would have you working 24/7 and you'd go, oh, I'm just sleeping on the left brain today.
But you're right, sleep is absolutely crucial. But again, that links in with diet, because the commonest disturber of sleep is low blood sugar. Now, I'm going to jump sideways for a moment, but a very good friend of mine, when I told her about the ketogenic diet, fantastic, she adopted it. She then got pregnant, had her 2 girls, and has reared both her daughters on a ketogenic diet. And the point about that is, from a few weeks of age, they slept well, because they are fueling their bodies on fat from her breast milk. And of course, because Michelle was eating a ketogenic diet, her breast milk was very low in sugars and carbohydrates. It was just rich in fat, and breast milk should be rich in fat. So they didn't get hungry, and both those girls sleep. And from a few weeks of age, they dropped off to sleep at 7:30 in the evening, and Michelle would have to go and wake them up at 8 o'clock the next morning.
Wow.
So there's Michelle with 2 lovely girls, and she's not missed a night's sleep.
That's the secret.
So the diet is essential for sleep, and disturbed sleep and insomnia is such a common complaint, across the board, and people get by, but lack of sleep is a big risk factor for cardiovascular disease, cancer and dementia.
Yes.
So sleep is really important.
And I looked after my dad when he had dementia for the last 2 years of his life, and then he went into a home. And of course, as soon as you go into a home, you degenerate anyway. But keeping him asleep was the hard thing, because he'd wake up and think it was morning and all of that. And we didn't want to use drugs, but sometimes it came to the point where it was beneficial for him, because he would want to walk out of the drive.
Voila.
And as you said before, there are so many ways to, it seems, not get to the point where dementia is the thing to begin with.
Yeah.
So how can you improve your sleep so that you don't get these terrible illnesses?
Okay, well, we live stressful lives, and we deal with stress with addiction. Again, a lovely aphorism. There are 2 things that kill people: addiction and ignorance. And we know the obvious addictions, caffeine, alcohol, cigarettes, but sugar and carbohydrates and processed foods are equally addictive. And worldwide, that addiction kills far more people than any other addiction.
Really?
And we eat sugars and carbohydrates in an addictive way, because in the short term, we get a little spike in blood sugar, which gives us a little bit of energy. And with energy, you can do anything, can't you?
Yes.
Every culture has its own addiction. So for the Scots, it's a sugar sandwich or a deep fried Mars bar. When I was working in Nottinghamshire, it was a chip butty, where you'd have white bread with chips between it. And, well, we know what they are, aren't they? But they do have a calming effect. And when your dad, bless him, was going demented, that would have been very stressful for him. And he would have gone to his addiction, which would have been chocolate biscuits, sweet cup of tea, a bag of crisps, or whatever. And that would have been his moment of pleasure for the day.
And just on that point, because one of the things that sort of went through my sister and my mind and my sister was a nurse, is that because he had dementia, and it seemed to us it was just a one-way journey, we would kind of let him have all those things that he wanted, because it was too late to say, you've got another 20 years, mate.
Of course. But we know that ketogenic diets can reverse dementia, but the person's got to want to do it. It's the old story, you can lead a horse to water. And unless they are completely and 100% convinced and have can work it out and the discipline to do it, it's not going to happen. And by the time they start to get dementia, that's gone. The desire to do it, the self-discipline, that slipped away as well. So we all have to start preventing dementia now, today. And cut out the sugars and the carbohydrates and the processed foods, take the fish oil, measure homocysteine, which is a measure of how well our B vitamins are functioning, and then, no, you're not going to get that. Because obviously I know I'm going to die, but I tell you what, if I lose my mind, I might as well be dead.
Well, the audience don't want you to lose your mind because you're writing such terrific books. And
that's very generous of you, but I don't want to lose it either.
No, of course. So then managing your sleep itself is again a discipline, I suppose, saying I will go to bed at whatever time, 10 o'clock, and depending on when you've got to get up, of course.
Correct. And again, on a ketogenic diet, that means your blood sugar levels are stable. Don't drink alcohol because, alcohol again, might get you off to sleep initially, but then you wake up in the middle of the night with low blood sugar and adrenaline and all that. And then, of course, the physical things, dark, quiet room. As we age, our ability to make melatonin declines, and very often melatonin is very helpful. 3 milligrams, 10 milligrams. Some people need 30 or 40 milligrams. So,
do you make that from sunshine?
No, the body makes that, but you're absolutely right, it's controlled by sunshine.
Right.
So the normal way that we manage our circadian rhythms is in the daytime we get light, lots of bright light on the skin that wakes us up and keeps us going.
Yes.
And then as light fades, that stimulates the pineal gland to make melatonin. Melatonin is the sleep hormone. Now, it doesn't make us sleepy, but without melatonin, we can't sleep. It gives us the correct hormonal environment. That then kicks the pituitary gland into action that produces thyroid-stimulating hormone, and that spikes at midnight. So we get our highest levels of TSH at midnight. Thyroid-stimulating hormone then stimulates the thyroid gland, and that starts producing T4, one of the thyroid hormones, which is relatively inert, and that spikes at 4 o'clock in the morning. That is slowly converted to T3, which is the active thyroid hormone. That spikes at 5 o'clock in the morning. T3 then circulates around the body to the adrenal glands and give the adrenal glands a kick, and they shovel out adrenaline and cortisol and DHA, and that spikes at 7 o'clock in the morning, and that wakes us up.
So is that an 8-hour cycle?
That's a 24-hour cycle.
24-hour cycle.
And with any one of those things not in place, then you won't get quality sleep.
A lot of people have been reporting that phones, computers, the blue light from all of that, especially in the evening, is not good for you. Particularly also these LED lights that we've been given. Now, something that Julia and I have been doing for about a month now is we turn off the lights and we use candles.
Ah, lovely.
It is very nice. And one of the interesting side effects of that, we sleep much better, and I don't know whether we could put it down to that at all, but we've found, and this has been a curious thing for a man with one eye,
yes.
Is that you see in the dark so much better because you're not in the evenings with all this bright light. We're in the studio here, it's got a lot of bright light. But at night time, as you're settling down, it's amazing how one candle, the light from that and the eye, at first you think, I couldn't stick this because it's so dark.
Yes.
But over a little period and over the month, our eyes have got so used to it. It's romantic and it's nice, and you don't need to see into the corners of the room where the cobwebs are and all of that. So do you think candlelight is an important thing? Does that make a difference?
Well, that's the first time I've heard that, I have to say, but darkness is important. And so the fact the candlelight is going to be lower, less brightness, and so that's going to be helpful. So, but primitive, it's the old story. When you have a difficult question, go back to evolutionary biology. And, primitive man, primitive woman slept when it was dark. And darkness is very important to help us get good quality sleep. And I think a candle is a step on the way to darkness, isn't
yes,
it?
It's sort of you slowly going, it's dark. So presumably you need more sleep in winter.
Correct.
Because it's darker.
Absolutely. And another clue here from the chronic fatigue syndrome patients is the clinical picture. Very often they're owls. They don't drop off to sleep naturally until maybe 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, and they don't wake until maybe 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And that gives you a clue that there's something wrong with their ability to produce melatonin, and we can supplement that very easily. Or they have an underactive thyroid, or they have an underactive adrenal gland. So that gives a very useful clinical clue as to where to look, where to go for the next part of treatment.
It's an absolutely fascinating subject, and you obviously know it so well. One of the things that I've been learning on this whole journey is how much the body is trying to tell you when you're not very well. And if you wait till the clanging symptoms, as it were, when you go, oh my God, I have got to go to the dentist after all this time, or there is something. it's not too late, but it's much later than it should be.
You are so right, and in fact, the way I explain it to people is we all have a certain bucket of energy available to spend in the day, and as we spend that energy, that energy gap narrows. Now, if we spend more energy than we have in that bucket, then you will die. You will die because you don't have the energy for the heart to work, for the brain to work, and so on. And so the body starts to give you symptoms to stop that energy gap getting too narrow.
Yes.
Because that's disaster. And now what we humans do is we mask the energy gap with addiction. And that's another reason why addiction is so dangerous. And in fact, sometimes you hear on the radio some poor kid who went to a party and took ecstasy or amphetamine, and they danced all night, and they were extrovert, and then they suddenly dropped dead. And I'm quite sure that drug masked that energy gap, and they overspent, and bang, and away they went. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but it's very biologically plausible that should be so. So that's the point. We have symptoms for very good reasons. Now, we will all be tired at the end of the day. That's normal. That's what we expect. And that's what drives us to sleep.
Yes.
But the difference between normal fatigue and the pathological fatigue we see in long COVID and ME and chronic fatigue syndrome is you pay for it the next day. So you get delayed fatigue. It's called post-exertional malaise. So if anybody has post-exertional malaise, then they are on the slippery slope to chronic fatigue syndrome. And very often people say, I drive myself to work, and then at weekends I sleep all day and I catch up and I rest. They are on the cusp of getting a chronic fatigue syndrome because they are not working within their abilities. They're involving a sleep debt, maybe a fatigue debt, which they catch up with at weekends and holidays. And that's not a healthy state of affairs. And the other clue that you're on the slippery slope to chronic fatigue is the use of addictions to keep going. I can remember talking to a practitioner at one of my medical meetings who was telling me about a patient she was looking after who was a woman. She'd got 4 kids. She was working in the city. She was a banker. She was doing this, that, and the other. And she came to have a health check. And she was apparently functioning at a very high level. But this practitioner said to me, but when I did her bloods, they were so abnormal. She'd got inflammatory markers, abnormal white cell counts. What do you think's going on? And I stopped and I thought for a moment. I said, she's on cocaine, isn't she?
Ah, gosh.
And she went back and she was running her lifestyle on cocaine, but her bloods were grossly abnormal and she was at risk of just dropping dead like that.
A friend of ours admits, and he says he runs, I won't mention the brand, but it's an energy drink, a well-known energy drink, and if you're in Spain you might go to one of those fights, sort of thing.
Yep.
And he drinks 6 or 7 of those cans a day. He doesn't eat a huge amount correctly. He does have highly processed foods and things. And he seems to say, but it gets me through the day.
Well, it's like saying, you're getting through the day on speed or cocaine. Okay, it gets you through the day, but it's short-term gain and long-term pain. That person risks just dropping dead. Yes,
that's my worry for him. So, Kieran, get off it. He won't thank me for that. Finally, as we sort of come to the end, when people eat these diets, we've been taught to have 3 square meals a day, and that it's important. Now, I really only have 1 meal. I graze a bit with some bits of some nuts and some various other bits and bobs. I know you're not into dairy, so I do occasionally have a bit of cheese.
That's fine. A bit's fine.
And things like that. I try to keep off bread. I don't buy bread very often, unless I'm away and we need something to put something on. But how many meals should we be eating? What say that again. What quantity of food should we have in a daily?
Well, it's the old story, go back to primitive woman and see what she did. And did she have 3 meals a day? No, she didn't.
She didn't go down to the supermarket, did she?
No. And the reason that people need 3 meals a day and snacks is because they're carbohydrate addicts. They're running on sugars and carbs, and they are very short-term fuels. So yes, if we can aim to consume all our meals within a window of time, I try to do a 6-hour window, so I have lunch at 1 and supper about 6, and the rest of the time I'm fasting, and that has some very important benefits. Now, the first and probably greatest benefit is it's very helpful for our gut. Because as we mentioned earlier, the upper gut should be a sterile, digesting, acidic gut for the business of for digesting fats and meats. Now, if we eat a lot of sugars and carbohydrates and we're constantly drip feeding with fruits and biscuits and crisps and so on, then we overwhelm the ability of the upper gut to be sterile and it starts to ferment.
Right.
And the fermenting upper gut is such bad news because you ferment to produce toxins like alcohol, D-lactate, hydrogen sulfide, which give us foggy brain and fatigue. We malabsorb vitamins and minerals because the microbes gobble them up instead. The microbes themselves produce fungal mycotoxins, bacterial endotoxins, which poisonous. And then those microbes themselves can get from the gut into the bloodstream and drive pathology at distal sites. And so much modern pathology, like inflammatory bowel disease, like arthritis, polymyalgia, fibromyalgia, urticaria, these pathologies are all driven by allergy to microbes from the upper fermenting gut. So by intermittent eating, you are helping your gut enormously.
Presumably, ancient primitive man, woman would have grazed, taken the opportunity if they had berries and nuts and things available to them, knowing that they may not eat later on. So is grazing a bad thing to do?
Well, they wouldn't have grazed. They would only grazed effectively in the autumn when those foods were available.
Right.
Most of the years they would have been
answer.
hunters.
Didn't think of that one, did I?
Most would have been hunters. And what's so interesting is that they'd have feasted and then fasted. And when they'd have feasted, they'd have felt lethargic, sat around, had a chat, had a giggle, told stories, and then they'd have got hungry. And what's so fascinating is when you go hungry, you improve your physical performance and you improve your mental performance. So the samurai warriors, for example, would always fast for 24 hours before a great fight or confrontation of some description. We know that fasting improves your mental performances. So rats, if fasted, their ability to solve mazes is much better when they're hungry.
Yes.
So being hungry is no bad thing. It's good for our brains. It's good for our bodies. And if you are keto adapted, after approximately a 16-hour fast, you then switch into what's called autophagy or self-eating. And that's how we deal with cancer cells. Because we're all producing cancer cells all the time, and the immune system goes and nips them off, nips them out and kills them before they become a problem. And then autophagy, the immune cells then gobble up those dead cancer cells or those dying cancer cells or those bits of proteins that shouldn't be there. So that protects us from cancer. So yes, the way you're eating is totally commendable.
Right, as long as I'm not grazing too much, and
only in the autumn.
Only in the autumn. And I mean, you mentioned there that ancient man would have hunted. They would have sat around and once they're sated and things, and would have just enjoyed life.
Yes.
And that's one thing that seems to be in the world that we're in now, and this is what I really don't understand. Here we are in the 21st century, supposed to be at the top of our game, and yet we must be the illest that we've ever been.
Yes.
And we're the most stressed. We're working incredibly hard. I know people say, we don't want to go back to living in caves, but sometimes it seems much better to just live in a cave, buy a wildfire, graze a little bit here, hunt an animal, and just enjoy life.
Absolutely. And there's a lovely story that illustrates this, which has to do with the colonization of America. So when the white man moved into America, of course, he was occupying lands and throwing the Indians out. And occasions would happen where an Indian child would end up in a white man's community and a white man's child would end up in an Indian's community. And what's so fascinating is the white children that end up in the Indian community, there they stayed. They didn't want to come back. Whereas the
really
Indian child in the white man's community, they did all they could to get back to their home tribe because they felt part of a tribe. We are a community. We need to live in tribes. We need to sit round. We need to talk. We need to have a giggle. We need to have a joke. And we need to be chilling out much of the time. And then, in a community effort, we all then get together for the purposes of hunting or gathering or firewood or whatever. And that's how we should live. And we're not living like that.
When you go camping, for example, this is one of the things that dawned on me a few years ago when we went camping and we were at a campsite, and you're seeing the kids running around freely. There's a fire pit, and people from tents or caravans, wherever, starting to interact. Say, oh, have you got such and can I borrow this? Yes. And people are just doing. And I suddenly thought, this is effectively what we used to do.
Of course.
And now we do it for holidays and recreations.
Of course.
And people get a lot out of it. We should be doing that pretty much 24/7, 365.
Of course, as they say, it takes a village to raise a child. And there you just described your perfect village.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our lovely Dr. Sarah Myhill comes in with all the common sense. And the book is available, presumably, from all good bookshops?
Certainly
from your website.
Well, from my website, yes. That's the place to get it from, please.
And I'll put a link. Is it on there? I'll put a link to it.
Yes, it'll be on there. Yeah.
Chronic fatigue syndrome. I'll get you to pronounce it.
It's mitochondria, not hypochondria. My patients who were told that they were just hypochondriacs were very pleased to see that subtitle.
Oh, fantastic! Yes, full of good goodies, as you heard here, just a sample of. So do go and check it out. And I must ask you, who is Craig Robinson? Because we see that on your books.
Oh, bless him. Well, I do the enjoyable stuff, like write the books, and then Craig comes in and does the tidying up and adds in little quotes. He's a polymath. He knows so much about the ancient history, modern history, so he pulls out little vignettes that illustrate the points that I make and does boring things like proofread it and put it together. So yes. He is an essential part of the team.
Absolutely. Brilliant stuff. Well, Sarah, it's been an absolute joy to have you in. I hope you'll come back in a few months' time and continue to do the good work and tell all the lovely audience all about what you're up to. But in the meantime, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me, Richard.
So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. I will be back with more monologues and more wonderful interviews. But in the meantime, from Dr. Sarah Myhill and myself, thank you so much for watching. And if I can find where the cursor is, I can turn the machine off. Sorry about the audio at the beginning of this, but Dr. Myhill's microphone was up, which is the most important bit. Till next time, from us, goodbye.